On today's show, the Hawks play again on Friday evening, but in the meantime, a Friday mailbag for your listening pleasure. Your questions, my answers, and all of that is coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1919 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you late into the night here on a Thursday evening into Friday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel. And right now, if you are a new customer at FanDuel, get $150 in terms of dollars in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more happens to win. Check it out now at FanDuel.com. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. We are everywhere on the audio side, from Apple and Spotify, etc. Plus, we are also on YouTube. Please like this video as you are watching it and tell your friends about the podcast anywhere they might happen to find it. And we'll dive in today to mostly what is going to be a mailbag podcast, quite frankly. We have been covering the Hawks all week long. If you missed it, I did a deep dive on the game on Wednesday night. And by the way, it was a frustrating and pretty bad loss for the Hawks, which of course means that some people don't want to listen to the podcast, which I definitely understand. But at the same time, before the Hawks return to action on Friday evening against the Oklahoma City Thunder at home, wanted to answer some questions, talk about some topical stuff, etc. By the way, at the end of this episode, I will dive into a little bit of a mini preview of Hawks Thunder on Friday. But in the meantime, the rest of the show will be kind of programmed by you, the listener and viewer of this podcast. So we'll dive in right now with a question from Hayden that is very topical the last few days. The question is Dyson Daniels a real candidate for Defensive Player of the Year after Victor Wembanyama got hurt? It looks like he would be with all of his steals. So, good question here from Hayden. And by the way, if you want to send in a question ever to this podcast, the mailbag is always open. We don't always do like dedicated call outs for questions. I have a file of them that I get either on social media. We are on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks, or at BT Rowland is my personal account there. Or you can send in questions via email at lockedonhawks@gmail.com. Anyway, the question is, of course, about Dyson and DPOY. And I might not normally do like a full-blown deep dive on this mid-season, but because Wembanyama was quite frankly just going to win this award until he got hurt, it became a much bigger story because it was like a massive sea change in the market when it comes to Defensive Player of the Year and betting odds and projections and voting and all that fun stuff. So it's pretty interesting at this point in time. Then there was this other subplot where Dyson was actually way off the radar for Defensive Player of the Year in the betting odds at FanDuel and other places. But now he is very solidly third, basically, on the list, behind only Jaren Jackson Jr. and Evan Mobley in some order. So a lot has changed here. So to answer the question in a very short way, yes, he absolutely is a real candidate. Like, very obviously, yes. I would also say, and look, some of that's just stuff, fans being fans or whatever, social media accounts, but I've seen Dyson be referred to as like the front runner or like it's his to lose. And I would not say that. In fact, that's not true at this point in time. Even if you think that he should be the front runner, that's different than actually is. There's some nuance there, but I would just point that out. But, and look, I think he definitely should be near the top of the list. No question. He has a very awesome case, honestly. But there are also questions about that case when you compare it to historical candidacies, basically. And mostly because he's a guard in some respects, also because of the team that the Hawks are basically putting up right now. So on the positive side for Dyson here, the stats are obviously just fantastic for him defensively. The big flashy one is his steals. He is currently averaging 3.06 steals per game. And no one else in the league is averaging more than 1.86. So he has a full 1.2 steals per game edge on the entire league. That's a massive, massive margin. To put it a little bit differently, he is averaging 65% more steals per game than any other player in the NBA. That is a ridiculous, ridiculous number. Like, obviously, it's not quite the same, but if you want to kind of say, all right, let's say a player was averaging 65% more points per game than somebody else, they'd be averaging 50-plus points per game. That's not realistic, but it's also exactly the margin that Dyson has on the field in steals right now. Also, he's averaging more than 6 deflections per game, which is a historic level, like league record making, basically, and 49% more deflections than anybody else in the league. Only Wembanyama, who's no longer eligible, was averaging more stocks, that's steals plus blocks, than Dyson. So now Dyson's going to have the lead in that category as well. He's averaging about 3.8 plus steals plus blocks. No other player is more than 3.4, so he's probably going to win that as well. Not like one of those records that you're going to talk about to your kids, but at the same time, notable for sure. And he also has really strong advanced numbers. Some of the catch-alls like EPM and all those numbers, like he's very good there. Not the absolute top, which is notable, but still very, very good across the board. And crucially, look, it's not just stats. I say this all the time, but if you're a new listener to the podcast or whatever, if you are a guard, you have to have stats to pop to have any chance at all, honestly, because guards are not usually who win the award. But he also has the stats, and he's defending the number one option every night on a pretty good defense for the Hawks. Playing a lot of minutes, not fouling, which is impressive. Also, he's a good rebounder, which kind of goes under the radar a little bit, but he is very, very strongly above average in rebounding for his position, which does matter, especially on the defensive glass, averaging about 6+ rebounds defensively per 100 possessions, a very solid number there for a guard. So it's obviously a real candidacy. And anyone says that it's not is just not looking at the actual numbers. With that said, there are things working against Dyson as well when it comes to Defensive Player of the Year. And again, all of this is couched with there's still 30% of the season left. So a lot of stuff can change. But 2 guards have won Defensive Player of the Year in the last 36 years. And only one of them has won it since 1996. It is a big man award, and if big men don't win, it's usually a big physical wing player. It's not usually a guard. Marcus Smart won in 2022, 3 years ago. And I didn't love that at the time. I thought it was the wrong choice. I think it looks pretty bad now, which might actually even hurt Dyson because people remember that. It's recently enough where it's like, oh, that was kind of a mistake. His claim that year was that he was the best defender on the best defense. That was basically the thought process behind giving it to Marcus Smart. Boston was number 1 in the league in defense, and that boosted him. But I didn't love that, and it doesn't necessarily help Dyson at the moment. Again, bigs tend to win, and right now the betting favorites at FanDuel are Jaren Jackson Jr. and Evan Mobley in some order. Jaren already won this award. Mobley has a great reputation defensively. He will probably win it at some point, if not this year. Very good defender. But so that's one thing there. And look, this is 100 people voting, so it's not like the history is all that matters, but it does matter some. The voters have patterns. You can see this stuff a lot of the time. So the other one is the team success. The Hawks are not winning a ton of games compared to, for instance, the Grizzlies or the Cavs. I will say this, the Hawks are the best that they've been defensively by the numbers since 2016-17. That's notable because Dyson is the biggest addition and the reason, or at least one of the reasons why they are better this year. They are about league average defensively, though. That is way better than previous years, but not exactly what you would expect for a Defensive Player of the Year winner. Usually, you got to be on a top team, either a top defense or a top record, or both, preferably. And Dyson has neither of those right now. So last year we saw this. It's not the exact same award, but I still firmly believe that Bogey would have at least come closer, if not won Sixth Man of the Year last year, if the Hawks had just won 45 games instead of 36 games. It's not a huge difference, but it also is a meaningful one for voting. There are some voters, candidly, that seem to not consider anyone that isn't on a legitimately good team. Now, I don't agree with that, but it's definitely part of the mix with some awards. So there's a long way to go here again, but I think when Wemby went down, it became interesting. I think for Dyson to actually win Defensive Player of the Year, this is just projection for me. I'm not telling you this is definitely what's going to happen, but if he wants to actually win it, not finish 3rd or finish 4th, but actually win it, I think this is not something I love, but he probably needs the Hawks to win a bunch of games. That's my guess. If the Hawks finish as the 9th or 10th seed in the East, he probably isn't going to win it. No matter how much you think that's wrong, that's probably just the reality that we're living in. Also, it would be nice for him and his candidacy if the Hawks improved their ranking in defense. Right now, the Hawks are right in the middle of the league. If they got to 10th, 11th, 12th, that would help a lot for his candidacy. And obviously, he basically just has to maintain his gaudy numbers, which I think is obviously what's happening now. Dyson has become, at least in the betting market, which is not everything, but certainly is a good indicator most of the time, a real candidate. He is. He has been awesome this year defensively, full stop. It is not his fault that the Hawks are not better defensively. In fact, he's their best defender by a wide margin. But usually the credit is kind of overgiven sometimes to guys on great defenses. So all that said, if I had a vote right now, and I don't, but if the season ended today and I had a vote, I would certainly consider voting for Dyson. Now, to be honest with you, I would have done and probably will do at some point a super deep dive on Mobley, on Jaren Jackson Jr., on Zubats, a couple other guys who are kind of fringy candidates, just to make sure that I don't have anybody that I'm missing. But certainly right now with what I have in front of me, I think Dyson is a very real candidate that I would consider voting for. And he's a very, very, very clear, to me, first team all defense player, which is, by the way, what he said preseason was actually his goal. That seemed lofty at the time, but he's going to be there, I think, unless something goes crazy wrong at this point in time. So we'll see on DPOY at this point in time. By the way, FanDuel has him at 8-1 as of this podcast, but he was like 40-1 or higher 2 weeks ago. So a lot has changed. But to answer the question more plainly, he's definitely a candidate. Whether he wins it or not, up for debate. Whether he should win it or not, up for debate as well. But certainly a very interesting candidate and having an awesome season by all accounts. All right, we'll get into more of your mailbag questions in a second. First, though, we'll come back in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, place live bets throughout the game. Even if you haven't missed opening tip-off or just want to bet on the fourth quarter or something like that, stay on the action with FanDuel. The live betting feature keeps every moment of the game exciting for you. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can actually combine the bets in live fashion together into a same-game parlay. Plus, they have offerings across the board like over-unders, point spreads, money lines, player props, game props, and much more. The FanDuel app is really safe and secure as well, and they cover the entire range of sports. That includes the NBA, college basketball, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, hockey, golf, tennis. They have soccer, both domestic and international. They have F1, they have NASCAR, boxing, MMA, and so much more. The app's really easy to use at FanDuel as well, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, if you are a new customer at FanDuel, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins at FanDuel. Place to go is FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, question from Asher, who says, how good would the Hawks be right now if Jalen Johnson was playing? I heard you say that Jalen being hurt is not being factored in enough, which makes sense, but they also weren't dominating when he played. So, yeah, it's true. They were not dominating when Jalen played. That's fair to say, and certainly I don't want to say the other side of this. So I did make the point yesterday on the podcast, also on social media, that I think it has been a little bit under-discussed lately among Hawks fans that Jalen's not there. I mean, that sounds like something that shouldn't be underdiscussed, but it's a real thing that they're missing. But you're missing a second best player who has a very clear skill set that no one else on the team has. That does matter quite a bit, and they were much, much better when he played than when he doesn't play. So for some numbers on that, the Hawks were 18-17 in games in which Jalen played his normal minutes, or not anyone close. There was one game he left early with injury after about 10 minutes, and they lost that game by 3 points. They probably would have won it, in my opinion, if he had played. But they were 18-17 in his actual games that he has played in for more than 10 minutes. So if you do the math there, they're 9-15 without him. And that speaks to it for itself. They're pretty good, not incredible, but pretty good with Jalen, and not so good without him so far. Also, when you go back to January 23rd, his last game that he played in for the season, the Hawks were more than 9 points per 100 possessions better with Jalen on the court than they were with him off the court when he was playing. So even when he was there, it was very obvious the impact he was making. They were above water when he was playing. They were well below water when he wasn't playing. So it's tough to know exactly how much better they would be, but it is a massive loss, and that's pretty obvious, but also just is worth stating pretty plainly. Now, before I get to the crowd that just accuses me of making excuses all the time, I'm not. The Hawks still have to win games. Every single team has injuries. Every single team has injuries. I don't like to do overly the crutch of injuries. But when your second best player is out for the season from January on, it is a factor you have to probably acknowledge. And for one, they have some depth challenges right now. Like, they'd be better, but currently at this moment, 4 of their top 11 or 12 guys from the preseason are out for a while, if not for the season. That does matter, especially when one of them is Jalen. But the biggest thing that changed this season when Jalen went down was that the upside scenarios kind of went away. I said that about a month ago on the show. They can stay afloat without Jalen, and they have for the most part. But the upside, like, can they be the 5 seed now? Probably not. That was in play, though, I thought, and when Jalen was still playing. Not like a definite scenario, but certainly in play. I think they still will make the play-in, and they can make the playoffs, obviously. But there was a world in January, again, where they could have been the 5 seed or the 6 seed. And that stuff is probably not on the table super likely at this point in time. So as the question said, I brought it up last night. And again, you have a lot of guys have injuries for what, just goes without saying. But particularly in discussions about guys like George Niang and Mo Gay or whatever, and the power forward spot in general, and the versatility of the roster in general, it kind of needs to be couched in the fact that Jalen's supposed to be there. For example, George Niang is a rotation player. That's been proven. He was a rotation player on the Caps, who are really, really good. But probably it's worth pointing out that Niang is their best power forward right now, but he's not someone you want to play starter minutes, probably, if you can help it. If Jalen's there, he's not. When Jalen's not there, he kind of has to play more. And again, he'd be probably better in a role that was closer to what he did in Cleveland when he was basically playing the 7th or 8th most minutes on the Caps. That is his best role. That's not the role that he's in right now because Jalen isn't there. That's very obviously logical. He's a flawed player, but he is someone who can play. I think it got crazy last night, for example, by the way, after Wednesday's game. It went from, hey, George Niang's making all these threes, he's really been helping them, to in literally one game, people are talking about how using the words trash and unplayable. And all this. I understand it's the internet, but man, one game of that, like he was pretty bad last night, but like, what are we talking about? Anyway, Jalen not being there magnifies a lot of that because guys get pushed into roles that they're probably not ideally suited for. That's just the reality. So as far as how good they would be if Jalen had not gone down, I would guess, and again, there's no way of knowing, so it's an educated guess, they would probably have 2 or 3 more wins over the last 5 weeks, basically, since he went down. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but if they had 2 or 3 more wins, let's say they won 3 more games, that would get, right now the Hawks are the 9 seed. If they won 3 of those games over the last 5 weeks, they would be right there in the 6 seed mix. That's a decent sized difference in 3 games. And I believe the Hawks would have won a couple more games. So over the course of the season, that matters. It's pretty meaningful. I think in general, the roster and the team would be that kind of 6 seed quality with Jalen on it. That general range. Take Jalen away without replacing him because he's out for the season with injury. You didn't trade him. Like he's still on the team, just not for the season. I think the team quality does drop to, 8th or 9th best in the Eastern Conference. And that's a meaningful difference. It's not the end of the world. It's not going from number 1 to number 15, but it's a meaningful drop-off. So hopefully that answers the question. I think it's pretty logical when you're talking about a guy who's, like, for me, a top 50-ish player in the league right now. That kind of matters. But there you go. That's my short-ish example of what's going on with Jalen. So one more question here. I shared a couple things about my confusion about Steph Castle being the clear favorite in the betting market for Rookie of the Year in comparison to Zaccharie Risacher being way down the board the other day on social media. And I got a question from someone named Penn, shouts to Penn, who asks, basically, talk about this on the podcast. I admit, this is him talking, that he bet on Risacher to win the award, but he says, regardless, it's something that I'm not understanding either. So I'll be short on this. I won't do a full deep dive on Rookie of the Year because I already did the Dyson one earlier in this podcast. Also, it's February. It might change. But I did say that, and I don't understand the difference, basically. If you want to tell me that you think Steph Castle is better than Zaccharie Risacher for candidacy for Rookie of the Year, I am fine with that. There's nothing controversial about that. But what I don't understand is how Castle is like number 1 on every list, betting markets, awards, columns or whatever, and Risacher is way on the board when they have extremely similar profiles. What I will say, there is NBA.com does a rookie ladder every week, I think it is. And in general, I pretty much always hate it. Not a personal thing. I just don't think it's very good. And this week, Risacher is number 6, which I just can't get there. That just seems crazy to me. If you look at the profiles of all these guys, that's just my opinion, alas. But look, there's no obvious frontrunner this year. I think everyone knows that. It's a weird rookie class, just like it was a weird draft class. We kind of knew that was going to happen coming into the season. It was a wide open race. Now, there is not a clear frontrunner overall, but it just becomes kind of like different kinds of candidacies to me. Like, for example, Jalen Wells of the Grizzlies has a pretty different candidacy than Castle or Risacher would. Wells is an older pick, 2nd-round pick, playing real minutes and playing well, by the way, for a very good Grizzlies team. So, like, his appeal, basically, is that he's NBA ready, he's playing on a good team, and playing well. That's a reasonable projection. Whereas Castle and Risacher are playing bigger roles on decent teams, not great teams, but decent teams. But they're younger, they're more high upside, etc. Then you have like Zach E, who was, of course, a big time name in college, is playing pretty well in the NBA, but is playing a smaller role. Is 22 years old. Like it's just different. It's a different kind of profile. Like then you have Khalil Ware is someone that I've seen a lot of like helium on recently. Talented player, but he just hasn't played enough to be really in this mix for me. I don't really understand that candidacy at all at this point in time. Anyway, I would totally understand a vote for Jalen Wells. I would totally understand a vote for Stephon Castle. So I'm not saying otherwise. But I just think it's very, 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 very similar between Risacher and Castle to the point where I don't understand our friends at FanDuel, for example, have Castle at like minus 120 to win the whole award. Like he's a favorite to win. And Risacher is like 13-1. And I don't understand the difference. So quickly on this, I think voting for Castle will be reasonable. But here's just what I would say. Usually the number one pick, if anything, gets an extra bit of boost on these things because there's expectations and people kind of buy that player. For whatever reason, the market and like perception, even by writers and like the internet, is treating Castle like he's the number one pick and Risacher like he's not. It's interesting, just counterfactual there. But by the numbers, just quickly head to head here, and then we'll move on. In scoring, Castle has about a 1 point per game edge. So it's an edge, not a big one. Rebounding, Risacher. Assists go to Castle pretty comfortably. That's a big feather in his cap, to be sure. Risacher has many less turnovers. These stocks, blocks plus steals, actually goes to Risacher slightly, by like 0.1 or 0.2. So it's pretty narrow. Shooting efficiency, both effective field goal percentage and true shooting, both go to Risacher. Notable there. And the advanced numbers, Raptor, EPM, BPM, DPM, LeBron, all these numbers, all of them go to Risacher except for EPM likes Castle better. So if anything, it's a narrow or bigger edge for Risacher. So all that said, like statistically, it's a dead heat. And if there is an advantage, it's pretty obviously Risacher, I think. Now, I had someone who I trust actually who writes about the NBA say, all right, well, yeah, but Castle's a better defender. Maybe he is. He's taking while Risacher is the number 2 or number 3 defender for the Hawks a lot of the time because Dyson exists. Castle's number 1 for the Spurs. That's a fair point. But the numbers and the advanced numbers, that's taken into account. Like they're not ignoring that. That's part of the mix there. The stocks go to Risacher. I think Risacher is a very underrated defender, for example. So all that said, I think Risacher is a candidate, should be one, and it's fine if you lean to Castle, but I don't understand the gap that I'm seeing perception-wise. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit and what I was saying online in some more clarity, but that's where I am right now on Rookie of the Year. And like Zach still, he's a candidate. He's not the front runner. It's fine. But I think as long as one of Castle, Wells, or Risacher wins it, I'll understand. Anybody else, I probably wouldn't understand at this moment. But hey, a lot can change in the last 6 weeks of the season. All right, more to come in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%, plus you get 4% APY on your cash and non-retirement accounts. That is over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. 3% subject match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 per month for 1 year for first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Then robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account and interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, and one more question. I think maybe 2, but probably just one more question from Dan, who says, maybe you haven't talked about this and I missed it, but why are the Hawks putting Trey Young on the injury list every game if he's always going to play? Is there a strategy to that? This is probably a shorter answer, but there's nothing definitive on this to be very obviously clear. Like the Hawks would never say what they're doing on the record, but a couple things here that are important context. The Hawks got fined on November 26th for sitting Trae in the national TV game against Boston on November 12th. That's been about 3 months. He's been on the injury report every single game since then. And that is not a coincidence, I don't think. I believe that is correlated to some degree. Now, I think the Hawks will probably deny that on the record, but it seems clear to me that there's a little bit of pettiness going on with the Hawks, which, by the way, I understand and support in this case. But the Hawks are, what I do know, the Hawks were very bothered by the fine that they got. And I agree with that. I thought it was a crazy fine to get. The Hawks very clearly had an injured player that they took out. They didn't handle it well, which I did say at the time. I criticized them for it. All they needed to do was list them on the injury report ahead of time, and they didn't do that. So they botched that handling. I'll be the first person to say that. But they were mad about it, and I understand that. So Trae was banged up. And by the way, it's worth noting, even in the question, like, he has missed 3 games since then. He actually missed a game in the last month. So, like, he's not totally always playing every game. What I would say is, from what I understand, he's been a little bit healthier recently. And the Hawks are either being careful or, if you'd rather, again, kind of petty about this, he's been probable for every game for a long time. He was questionable a few times before that. And by the way, I won't give you the full numbers here, but there's been a couple times he's been questionable or worse on the injury report. And that's kind of, that for me is now the red flag. If he's listed as probable on the initial injury report, I am assuming he's probably going to play or is very likely to play. Now, I've done this long enough to know that I should never be 100% sure on anything unless the guy is not listed at all. There's some chance he doesn't play. But I am now more leaning to him playing every game until I see something else. If he's listed as questionable or if the injury changes, right now it's the Achilles soreness. It's been that way for a while. So all that said, people are noticing this and asking me about it. It's become a joke. There was a meme about it this week that I really enjoyed on Twitter. But yeah, so I actually kind of called this when they got fined 3 months ago. I said kind of jokingly, but also somewhat serious, that I would list him every game the rest of the year. And the Hawks may not do that, but to date they have. Every single time they've had a game between now and when they were fined in November, he's been on the injury report. And again, he missed 3 games, but he's been listed every time, which I'm finding amusing at the very least at this point. All right, last thing before we get out of here, the Hawks do play the Thunder on Friday at home. It's been about 4 months since the Hawks have seen the Thunder. Because they're in the West, they only play twice. It's one home, one road. The road game was in October. Like, that was a long time ago. The Hawks lost it pretty badly in that game. It was the 3rd game of the season. And it was competitive, I will say, until the 4th quarter, and then the Thunder ran away with it. But honestly, a lot has changed since then. Jalen played in that game. David Roddy played 20 minutes in that game. Garrett Matthews played 22 minutes in that game. It was also probably Jalen's worst game of the season that night. He had 7 points on 13 shots, 4 turnovers. Like, he just did not play well at all. That was all over my notes in that game. He was bad. And look, people know this, but the Thunder are excellent. They are 47-11 this year, number 1 seed in the West. I wouldn't call them elite offensively, but they are very good, at least on offense, like top 5, top 6 in the league in efficiency. And they are absurd on defense. Number 1 in the league by more than 3 points per 100. They are awesome defensively. And because of that, they're number 1 in the league in net rating. They're plus 12.6 net rating. That is in the high rarefied air all time. They are lighting it up this year. They're number 1 in the league in opponent shooting. They're number 1 in the league in creating turnovers on defense. Like, there's a lot there that's pretty good, obviously. And they do foul a lot. In fact, it's kind of funny. Orlando and OKC are 2 of the top 5 defenses in the league, and they are the bottom 2 in free throw rate allowed because they just foul a lot. And they play very aggressively, and they kind of take the tact of you can't call all these fouls, and they're very physical, which could be interesting to see how the Hawks respond to that in this game. They're also not great on the glass. They're okay. It's been a little bit better since they got Chet Holmgren back, as well as Isaiah Hartenstein together. But they are, not a great shooting team, but they're pretty decent there. And they're number 1 in the league in not turning the ball over on offense. So they're number 1 in turnovers on offense and defense, which is pretty impressive, honestly. So, number 1, I can't wait to see Dyson defend Shea. That'll be awesome for the sickos like me. But as far as the keys to the game, my number 1 for sure is that basically, can the Hawks not get killed in the possession game? Like turnovers, the Hawks have had some bad ones this year at not taking care of the ball. For instance, the Thunder average about 7 more shots per game than their opponents. that number is going to need to be smaller or the Hawks are going to be in some trouble, for instance, in this game. But, all that said, a tough one for sure. Injury-wise, nothing new for the Hawks. Trae's probable again, but that's the only injury report thing other than the guys that are out. Jalen, Veet, Larry Nance Jr., and Kobe Buffkin. Thunder, same thing. They are healthy, it seems like, for the most part. All their key guys are available to play as of now. And our friends at FanDuel, it's actually a pretty significant fact here. Our friends at FanDuel make the Hawks 11.5-point underdogs as of Thursday night. That's a lot of points at home. And not a back-to-back, at home. Obviously, the Hawks are the less healthy team, but still not crazy unhealthy in this game. If that holds, it would be the second biggest underdog the Hawks have been this year. And by the way, if you missed it yesterday, I said this a little bit in more depth, but people always ask me why I share point spreads as much as I do. It's not because of betting. I share the point spreads because it's a good projection. In fact, it has been proven to be the best projection long-term of what a game is going to be or what it could be. And obviously, it doesn't mean that the Hawks are thinking about it this way. It's a very key point. I'm not on the team. The Hawks are not saying, oh, man, we split underdogs tonight. It's going to be a tough one. They're not thinking that way. They know the Thunder are good, obviously, but that's an external, I am a neutral observer point to make. All that said, they did actually, in the one game with a bigger point spread than this, they won. They were plus 16 in Boston in that game that Trae missed, and that was a shocking upset. But look, long story short, it's a game that the Hawks can win. They've actually been quite good against these really good teams this year. They beat Cleveland twice. They beat Boston, et cetera, et cetera. But the Thunder are really good, and you don't become a 11.5-point favorite for no reason. So the Hawks have a tough challenge ahead of them, but I'll be intrigued to see how they respond to it. And they're back at home, so I'll be in the building for that one on Friday evening. So all that said, I'll have a new podcast after that game on Friday in about 24 hours from now as I'm recording this podcast. Please subscribe to the show. Please tell your friends about the podcast as well, and find us anywhere from Apple to Spotify to YouTube, etc. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland, and follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I appreciate you for listening to the show all week long. Again, we'll have a new show after the game on Friday, and we'll see you all next time.